Well, good morning, everyone. It is 8 o'clock Central Time here in the United States. And so we are going to start today's webinar. Thank you for joining us for this World Council of Credit Unions COVID-19 Response Committee webinar, Driving Digital Transformation in the COVID-19 Era. My name is Greg Newman, Director of Communications for World Council. We've got a great agenda today, including presentations on Challenge 2025 and the digitization of the global credit union system. That includes a look at World Council's goal to increase worldwide credit union membership through the offering of digital services. That will be delivered by Brian Branch, our President and CEO. And after that, digital transformation imperatives for credit unions. Credit union advocate and technology thought leader Mark Sievewright will provide his perspectives on how financial services will change and the strategies needed for credit unions to survive and thrive. Digital transformation topics covered in this session will include data processing, online and mobile banking solutions, innovations in payment systems, data analytics, and the delivery of seamless member experiences. A couple housekeeping notes for you. Today's webinar does offer Spanish language translation services. You should see that on the bottom of your screen by clicking on the interpretation button. If you have any questions for our speakers, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and type them in there. I will ask those questions to both speakers at the end of today's program. Also, today's webinar is being recorded, and that's going to be available later today on the World Council YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is at youtube.com/WOCU. That's youtube.com/WOCCU. So if you missed any part of this, or if you have to leave early, or maybe you want to let somebody else know, you can find it there, and we'll have that up later this afternoon. So without further ado, we're going to start with Dr. Brian Branch. He has served as President and CEO of World Council since 2011. Dr. Branch has worked at World Council since 1990 and has been engaged in development fieldwork, research, and implementation during that time, and has credit union, microfinance, and other financial institution services involvement for more than 30 years. He earned a PhD in economics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and also has a Master of Arts degree in Latin American Studies from the University of Texas at Austin. Brian.
Thanks, Greg. And hello, everyone. I'm actually very pleased to be here with Mark Sievewright. When we talk about digital transformation, we're not talking about an event. We're talking about a journey. And this is a journey that Mark has been with us at the World Council as a dear friend and a colleague and a partner for many years. And Mark is actually the author of Digital Life, which is out this month and available, and something I enjoyed reading tremendously. So thanks for sharing this with us, Mark, and thanks for being with us this morning. Now, Greg talked about the work that World Council has done to increase membership growth for credit unions around the world, and very much looking at the lessons learned, the experiences, best practices of credit unions around the world, and trying to share those with other credit unions. And previously, we worked very aggressively to achieve some membership targets and found that credit unions actually were very successful in showing their value and increasing their membership, but we found that not all credit unions grow equally. And very early on, the lesson that we learned was that the credit unions that achieve high membership growth were those that offered their core services via online and mobile channels. And many countries are made up of large numbers of smaller credit unions. We found that those countries, which again achieved that high membership growth, were the ones that had established systems for credit unions to share the technology and the human costs of offering these digital channels. So Challenge 2025, which we set out with in 2017, is the call to action for the international credit union system for the digitization of that global credit union system. Can we go to the next slide, please? With the COVID crisis, frankly, we find a new sense of urgency for the digital transformation of credit unions. And this, we hear from credit unions in country after country across the continents, is the #1 priority for most credit unions today. Now, previously, this was a matter of consumer convenience and competitiveness. This was about being able to compete in the marketplace. Consumers do their social networking, they get their news, they make their payments, they do their commerce. Now, almost very significantly via online and mobile channels. So it's only natural they expect to do their finance via the digital channels as well. Well, in the COVID-19 world, it's no longer just a matter of convenience for consumers. It's a consumer imperative for health and safety. They feel more secure doing mobile transactions than they do in handling cash and doing face-to-face transactions. So in some credit unions, we have seen 50 to 70% of transactions in lobbies now move to becoming mobile transactions. When we talk about Challenge 2025, what is it that we're really talking about? Could we go to the next slide, please? The basic level of digitization is simply offering our core services via online and mobile channels. But it's more than simply adding on these channels. It's really about how easy they are to use. It needs to be intuitive, easy to understand. You know, the keys and the buttons need to work. There shouldn't be too many clicks to get to what the user needs. And we see, frankly, that the measure of customer service or customer friendliness has changed among consumers around the world. It used to be defined as person-to-person friendliness and helpfulness, and credit unions excelled at this, but now it's measured differently. And very often it's measured by the ease and the user-friendly nature of the digital processes. And frankly, we're finding many credit unions lag behind by these measures today. Now, Mark's going to talk to us about the importance of that member experience and how we can really gain from that. So simply digitizing access to the credit unions is not enough. It has to be simple, it has to be easy, but also keep in mind that consumers are doing their other payments and their commerce digitally. And they want to be able to integrate these actions with the financial transactions as well. So credit union digital channels need to integrate with the local payments ecosystem. It has to be simple, has to be seamless for consumers to feel at ease and to see that it's very convenient. This is difficult for many small credit unions to afford. So many credit unions have built shared platforms so that the individual credit unions don't have to invest redundantly in the same hardware and the same software to offer these digital channels. And usually it needs to be on a sound foundation of digital data processing. But the challenge is, how can they share the IT, human resources, as well as the technology to support these channels? Remember, our business as credit unions is not the programming of and the development of the technology. We use the technology to deliver our value, which are in financial services. But networking and shared platforms also give us the leverage to aggregate as a group and negotiate with vendors and establish strategic partners to bring that technology to credit unions at a lower cost and at a lower risk. But keep in mind, we're talking about risk as well here. With digitization, we open up more digital portals to our operations and we introduce more risk. So we're responsible for protecting our members' identity, their data, providing them with cybersecurity, and regulation in this area is one of the most rapidly expanding areas of regulations today. These regulations bring increasing costs. So again, many countries are using shared platforms to manage this risk and share the cost of the cyber protection systems, as well as that of regulatory compliance. One of the advantages that we have as cooperative institutions is that our systems manage a lot of data, which tell us our members' behavior, their history, and their preferences. And the analysis of that data can guide us in improving our products, responding to member service feedback, and it gives us the opportunity also to provide our members with that information that tells them, suggests to them a better choice for their financial health. So rather than using analytics to sell them things they do not need, such as a commercial institution might do, we use it to offer them ways to save money and improve their wealth, which helps build their trust and loyalty with our institutions. We can talk about some examples. If we go to the next slide, Siveright is a large credit union system in Brazil, and it's one of today's fastest growing credit union systems. And it provides an example of a shared approach, which allows numerous credit unions in Brazil to offer their services through a central digital channel system, which is supported by the network. Again, this is a shared opportunity so that a small credit union offers the same kinds of products and services and channels that a large credit union might. Another example is Phone, which is a small credit union in Macedonia, and they also have seen the importance of providing their members with digital access, and so they've developed their individual capacity through an app so that their core services are available to their members through digital channels as well. One of the things that we have found in a number of countries is that your online loan processing and approval, as well as mobile deposit services and mobile loan processing, are major membership growth on-loading ramps for credit unions. This provides easy access for credit unions to be able to join their credit unions. If we look around the world, we see many credit union systems indeed are made up of small credit unions. So again, the expense of digitization challenges many individual credit unions and small credit union systems. But one of the advantages, again, that we have as cooperatives is to be able to pool resources and cooperate in building shared platforms that provide a consolidated back office processing and a shared payment platform. So in several countries, credit unions have built shared platforms, and they've established strategic alliances to aggregate credit unions to connect to digital systems and to the country's digital ecosystem. And note there are two parts to that. One is building the shared platform, building the network, and the other, just as important, are establishing those strategic alliances with the technology providers to provide the technological access to our members. Again, this helps reduce redundant investments. It achieves investment scale, improves efficiency. It leverages bargaining power of the vendors. It extends our networks out further to reach more people, and it facilitates regulatory requirements. So some examples of successful data processing and payment systems include Siveright in Brazil, Fenacoac in Guatemala, the National Association in Poland, Iraq, and COSEFI in Dominican Republic, Pedicases in El Salvador, Camcool in Cameroon, Cusco in Kenya, Musco in Malawi, NACUFOLC in Korea, NATCO and PFCO in Philippines, Nefskun in Nepal, and the Estonian Union of Credit Cooperatives in Estonia. Also, Australia has one of the most advanced shared payment platforms called the New Payments Platform, which is owned by and serves both cooperative and commercial banks, as well as credit unions in Australia. So just a quick overview of what we call Challenge 2025, what credit union systems are working on around the world. If we go to the last slide, just another reminder that with this comes a new set of what we call the new regulatory wave of regulations about data protection, consumer protection, about payment services, and open banking. So it's a challenging time, lots of opportunities for credit unions though. And I'll pass it back to you, Greg, and very much looking forward to hearing Mark's comments.
All right, thanks, Brian. And I should mention, Brian will take questions if you have any and you want to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We're going to ask questions of both Brian and Mark from the panelists, from the attendees at the end of their presentations, at the end of both presentations. But I should also mention, if you're interested in Challenge 2025 and learning more, you can go to our website at woccu.org. That's WOCCU.org. And Challenge 2025, you'll find a tab for it at the top of the screen. There's information about what it's all about. And also there's a blog that we keep that we update every couple of weeks. In fact, you'll see a blog on there right now, our latest one from Mark Sievewright. So without any further ado, let's bring in Mark Sievewright. He is a renowned industry thought leader and consultant with more than 35 years of experience gained in senior leadership positions at HSBC, MasterCard International, Payment Systems Incorporated, Tower Group, and Fiserv. Mark established his own advisory firm in 2017 and works closely with credit unions and technology firms on business and technology strategy. In 2010, he was merited the prestigious Ambassador Award by the World Council of Credit Unions. Mark is a native of Wales in the UK and became a US citizen in 2012. He's the co-author of a new book that Brian showed earlier called Digital Life, written in collaboration with Microsoft executive Guillermo Kopp. Mark, the floor is yours.
Well, Greg, good morning. And thank you, Brian, and the whole World Council of Credit Union team to have me present today. It's greatly appreciated. And I will go ahead and start the presentation. I'm going to focus, as Brian said, on the digital transformation imperatives for credit unions around the world. You know, we are living in truly unprecedented times, not just because of the incredibly negative aspects of COVID-19 and what it's doing to human health and health systems and the economies around the world, but also conversely, just the fast changing nature of our industry being fueled by truly remarkable advances in technology. So I'm going to give you some context for why digital transformation is so important. And there are 5 macro trends that I want to talk to you about. The first is accelerating consolidation in the global financial services industry. And what this really means is that everyone, every participant is looking to drive more scale in their operations. Brian mentioned the pooling of resources that are possible through the cooperative nature of credit unions and enabled by World Council of Credit Unions. Many cases, consolidation reflects itself in mergers and acquisitions rather than the pooling of resources. I think there are tremendous opportunities out there for us to think holistically about our credit union futures and drive greater collaboration instead of trying to be singular in our approach to these changes that I'm about to discuss. The second trend is this incredible advance in technology that I just mentioned. I was speaking to a number of credit union CEOs recently through virtual media, of course. That's how we've been living our lives this year, isn't it? And I asked them if they thought the pace of technological change was fast. And of course, they all virtually put their hands in the air and said yes. And I said, well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the slowest it's going to be for the rest of your lives, which made them feel a little bit, full of trepidation, I think, for what the future might hold. But it's true. We are living in a time where technology and its advance is really reshaping not only our industry, but the changes and evidence that we're seeing that consumers are thinking differently about how they access and use financial services. Brian very expertly mentioned some of the consumer drivers behind this. And when we think about changes in expectations today, I can summarize them really around 5 areas. What consumers for the most part want today in financial services and in the non-financial services aspects of their lives are greater convenience, easier to use products, faster accessibility and fulfillment of those products and services, personalization, which Brian mentioned in the context of data and the tremendous asset that we all collectively have in the credit union system globally, and that's member data. And finally, those safety and security aspects that Brian touched upon. If you think about some of the favorite companies that you have, that you like to do business with, I would pretty much guarantee that they're delivering against your need for convenience, ease of use, speed, personalization, and safety and security. That seems to be the magic formula. And experience, member experience, is the new differentiator in our industry. For decades, we've talked about the importance of service, but experience goes beyond service. It really, and I'll touch upon this in a few minutes, it really tries to encapsulate all aspects of how consumers live their financial lives. The fourth trend is really triggered to a large degree by the trends that I've just talked about, and that's this changing nature of competition. We've seen around the world new entrants come into the financial services system and challenge the incumbents, the banks and the credit unions that have been doing business for centuries in some cases, but decades in many cases, and challenging their market share dominance. And a lot of those new entrants have a very simple formula. They focus exclusively on removing the friction that typically exists in how consumers access their financial lives. And many of them in many different countries have had a very important impact in gaining market share in certain product areas. And the global fintech community, and that term fintech, of course, has been around for a while, is really gaining momentum in terms of consumer adoption of fintech solutions. The final trend is demographic shifts, and globally, of course, we're seeing very dramatic demographic changes taking place. It's very interesting for me, and we'll touch upon this perhaps if we have time today in a little more detail, that younger consumers coming into the financial services industry for the very first time almost demand a digital first experience, the kind of experience that Brian mentioned in the context of Siveright when he described that digital only product. We're not quite ready yet as an industry to close down our branches, however. Our branches will continue to be important despite the advance of digital. But over the long term, we will find that many more global consumers demand and will have a digital first experience with their credit union or bank. So let's talk a little bit in the context of Challenge 2025, what COVID has actually done to our industry this year around the world. And there are a series of headwinds and tailwinds that I've summarized here in one fairly simple slide. Everywhere I look, I'm seeing credit unions expanding or accelerating their digital delivery solutions. Some things that some credit unions were planning to do 2, 3, 4 years from now, they're actually trying to get done now or in the next 12 months. Of course, as COVID has hit, we've seen a real rapid decline in the number of branch visits, as many branches of financial institutions have either been closed or limited in service, and an increased focus from members on touchless experiences, whether those are how we interact with our credit union personnel, the staff of the credit union, or how we interact in our own lives when we're self-serving in terms of online banking or payments access. A lot of that has moved to a sort of touchless environment. And for example, I've been struck by how in Europe, of course, we've had a contactless payments market for some time, as is in the case of many other parts of the world. But in Europe, it's fairly mature. The United States, by contrast, is just getting going, relatively speaking, with its contactless payment strategies. So there's a real diversity around the world in the maturity of some of these new payment systems. And of course, finally, we've all witnessed the rapid sort of operational migration to remote working in many parts of the world. So back on the theme of digital, one of the things that I'm really excited about is I think the time has come for the electronification of payment systems globally. And I mean in a much more sort of meaningful way than we've seen so far. One metric that I discovered recently was that between now and 2030, close to 3 trillion transactions will shift from cash to cards and digital payments, almost $50 trillion in value. And some of the images you see on this slide are really about consumers interacting differently when making payment or exchanging value. Sort of a tongue-in-cheek or humorous comment here. I was asked by a client earlier this month, last week, whether I saw a long-term future for plastic cards, in terms of payments. And of course, the answer was yes. Of course, there's a long-term future for plastic cards in the same way that there's a long-term future for branches. But I do see a time where a majority of payment transactions in certain markets will be done electronically without a plastic card, enabled perhaps through mobile devices or other devices, some of which you see in this image here on the lower right, that are perhaps wearables or other forms, even biometric transactions where no device or card might be needed. And we've seen some of those innovations already in certain parts of the world. So the payments business itself, before I leave the topic of payments, is undergoing rapid digital transformation. And I really enjoyed reading a study recently by Accenture, which looked at 4 territories around the world and plotted countries based on 2 axes. The first axis, the vertical one, talks about the current level of payments disruption within a particular country. And it plots it sort of low to high, as you can see here on the slide. And the horizontal axis is all about how susceptible these markets are to future or additional disruption. And you can see very clearly for our friends in the US and the UK that those two countries rank highest in terms of the existing level of disruption and the likelihood for more disruption to follow. And those of you, as we have a very terrific diverse audience today from different countries, you can perhaps identify yourselves, your countries from this slide, or if it's not mentioned on here specifically, it'll be a good exercise to try and plot where your country might fall on this particular grid. So back to the consumer, back to our member. One of the things that's become very apparent over the last 3 years or so is that members increasingly want and value these digital first experiences that I've mentioned. And in a project I did earlier this year, this image emerged. And this image shows a typical young consumer accessing different services and applications through her phone. And you can see here just an example of the many different things that she's doing. All of these things were possible now in this particular market. And what we can expect to see going forward is more demand for new ways to access information that we have about our members' accounts or business with us. And believe it or not, over the long term, we will be judged. We will be judged by how much self-service we allow our members to drive. Now, with a global audience like this, that's a pretty broad-reaching statement, because I know there's relative maturity here of different markets. But if you can accept the principle that one of the foundations of our industry going forward will be our ability to give members more and more tools or services to access their relationships with us, then I think we are on the same page. Now, let me talk and spend the remainder of my time focused on digital transformation itself. And really, Brian provided a fantastic setup for this in his remarks this morning. So as I speak with credit unions, I emphasize 5 strategic imperatives that will allow credit unions to survive and thrive and prosper in this rapidly changing world of ours. And at the heart of this, you see digital transformation, because the reason I've centered it this way is it truly is an enabler for the other imperatives that you see here. If I take digital transformation out of this, the rest really become very difficult to achieve. And the level of innovation that we're able to drive is substantially reduced. So as digital transformation really spreads globally, with many different industry sectors embracing it, I think it's helpful to define what it actually is. And digital transformation in its sort of most simplistic term is defined in this way. It's an opportunity to reimagine how you bring together your people, your technology, your data, and your business process to create value for the members you're trying to serve and to gain some competitive advantage. Now, based on Brian's comments this morning, we don't always have to do this singularly or individually as credit unions. We have the opportunity to share, to collaborate on this. We also have access to tremendous technology companies and other perhaps credit union-owned service organizations that support the achievement of digital transformation. And it's not enough, by the way, to think about digital transformation just through the lens of introducing new technology. That's not it. New technology does not address bad business process. So if we have things internally that we can improve at the credit union, those can have as significant effect on the ability for us to create value and differentiate ourselves as just introducing new technology would. So it's really important to look at this in a very holistic way. At the center of digital transformation is having a digital mindset. I'll show you in a second the correlation between great leadership and great digital capabilities. It's not enough just to have great technology. It's really important that the mindset of leadership and employees and also the culture of an organization support it. And you'll see at the heart of this schematic, analytics and business intelligence. Data is the new fuel, of course, for analytics, and also for new technologies such as artificial intelligence, which will become a main part of our industry this decade. And as we move forward, we have an opportunity to kind of recalibrate how we do business, to reimagine how we do business, to deliver these primary benefits of engaging our members, optimizing our operations, empowering our employees, and transforming our products. And Brian mentioned earlier some of the challenges in different markets around the world in delivering on digital transformation. And this schematic here represents a very straightforward sort of diagram, if you like, of the solutions that credit unions need to offer or have within their own ecosystems. Now, for some markets around the world, this is a very complex goal or aspiration to deliver this kind of model. And again, it doesn't have to be delivered singularly. It's possible to share data processing systems. It's possible to share, as Brian pointed out, mobile banking and online banking solutions, card services, and so on and so forth. But essentially what we're trying to build to achieve digital transformation is a sort of hub and spoke model where the spokes around that core data processing system are actually more valuable than the core data processing system itself. Because those areas around the core data processing system deliver the most value and opportunities to differentiate. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago that it's not enough just to have great technology. And a study was released earlier this year by MIT in the United States, which said, look, we've studied corporations around the world, and we've discovered that those corporations and businesses and banks and credit unions who have great digital capabilities combined with strong leadership are the ones that generate the best returns. Now, in our cooperative model, of course, we're less concerned about profitability by comparison to a Fortune 500 company. Of course, we understand that. For us, profitability is about driving our ability to influence members' lives positively and improve our capital. But the principle here of combining digital capabilities with great leadership, nonetheless, is very relevant. And this is a model that we have to follow. So let me spend the remainder of my time talking about what's next relative to technology innovation. The first area is data analytics. Now, as I mentioned, data is sort of the fuel of our system, and Brian touched upon this as well. And we shouldn't think of data only as a way to market more products or the right products and relevant products to our members. That's incredibly important, of course. But we should think about data as in terms of its ability to help us manage the service delivery of our credit union. And linked to this, the growth in artificial intelligence, which of course is sequential to the growth in data and data analytics, is becoming really important. In the same way as I mentioned, data is not just about marketing new products and services, but it's also about service. We're now seeing evidence in different parts of the world that artificial intelligence is actually sitting behind some of the service capabilities of financial institutions. In the lower right-hand corner of this image, you see a group of what look like human beings. I think you would agree with that, but of course they're not. These are avatars used in the Australian banking system to service Australian banking customers. When somebody interacts with one of those banks through video banking, on their mobile device. They're seeing a personalized avatar that they've created, they've selected, and that avatar is engaging with that bank customer conversationally, almost as if it was human, and undertaking tasks then as instructed by the bank's customer in the back office of the financial institution. Now, many of us are a long way from having that type of capability available to us, and certainly in the market that I sit, the United States, I'm not sure that consumers would adopt it quite as readily yet as they might in 2030, when I think that acceptance will be more pronounced. But we're starting to see evidence in different markets of the application of artificial intelligence in the service arena, not just in the back office. I think that biometric technology is going to have an even more meaningful role in our lives as we move forward here through the next 5, 6, 7 years. Many of us are already used to using our fingerprint, perhaps to access our phones, or our facial ID to access devices. But over time, we're going to see the use of biometrics expand into the payments arena, for example. In China, Alipay has launched a few years ago, in fact, a concept called Smile to Pay, where the consumer, as you see on the left-hand side of this image here, is having her face recognized by the point of sale device. And it's the act of smiling that actually activates the payment, which is why it's called Smile to Pay. And this is getting rapid adoption. And similarly, when I look to Northern Europe, this is an example taken from Stockholm, Sweden. This lady pre-COVID-19, obviously, this is one of the drawbacks, right, of having a touch-based or contact-based payment. She's using the palm of her hand to buy that morning coffee. Now, of course, with all our aspirations and hopes for a COVID-19 vaccine, and this day is significant, of course, not just because we're having this Challenge 2025 webinar, but also because the first humans have received the vaccine today in the United Kingdom. Post-COVID-19, I can see us moving to more biometric-based payment capabilities. And certainly this one in Stockholm, Sweden, is incredibly innovative. Let me summarize kind of where I think the industry is moving. Now, most of us are at the bottom center of this slide. We have a traditional sort of set of offerings. We have a fairly siloed delivery structure. We have a discrete group of products that we offer to our members, and that represents the world today. But as we move forward in time, we start to move to the left and the upper right of this image. We start to provide more frictionless experiences for our members. We provide more intelligence behind how we're interacting with them and how we allow them to interact with us. And this world is now unfolding, which is why I have so much support for the Challenge 2025 initiative of the World Council, because Brian and his team's recognition that we are heading towards this world is fundamentally important for us. As we move forward and we figure out, what is the world likely to look like 10 years from now, I think these 7 core change agents, if you like, are going to be the ones that we have to pay real attention to. We already know that the structure and scale of our industry is changing. While the World Council today supports around 86,000 credit unions around the world, Brian and his team can tell you how the contraction of credit unions in some countries has been really a staple of the past 2 decades. Where I am in the United States market, of course, with just over 5,000 credit unions, we had 20,000 credit unions when I first became involved in the credit union system. The definition of value is going to shift. The loyalties of consumers will shift towards those companies that can best deliver on those experience requirements or needs that we talked about earlier. Consumer behaviors will continue to shift and will be enabled by more and more technological access that allow them to improve their lives, not just their financial lives, but their lives in general. And then how we deliver those services we offer and utilize emerging technologies, for me, becomes one of the most important determinants of our future success. We cannot ignore the emerging technologies we've just briefly touched upon today. We have to figure out a way to embrace these new emerging technologies and make them part of how we do business. And the competitive landscape around the world will continue to change. Brian mentioned the regulatory framework earlier this morning. Well, in some markets in Europe, in parts of Asia, in Canada, closer to home for me, here in New England, we've seen regulatory changes take place already that enable open banking, the ability for new competitors to enter the market in an easier way than was possible before that regulation took place. And open banking, I think, is a concept that could spread and have quite a global connotation to it by 2030. In terms of getting ready for this world, and this is where, Greg, I will wrap up and hand back to you in a minute. I'm often asked by my clients, how do we get ready for this future? What should we do? And these 6 components of the future operating model are the ones that I always cite. The first thing, it begins with culture and mindset. We have to have a member-first culture, which of course credit unions are renowned for. And generally in the financial system, I'm speaking more broadly now, customers have to be at the heart of everything that gets done. Organization and talent. People make the difference. Despite all of this technological change, people will still make the difference. And we have to make certain that we have the right kind of people in our credit unions organized optimally. Data and data analytics are going to become linchpins for how we do business. Brian mentioned this. The data that we have access to really is very unique. And our ability to harness that data and make good use of it, both in marketing and service terms, is really important. And then driving more efficiency and effectiveness in our business. And here's where the cooperative model really comes into play. Our ability to generate another dollar of revenue tomorrow at a lower cost than we generated that today, that's going to be an incredibly important factor for us. That's what I mean when I talk about efficiency. And the cooperative model of credit unions naturally lends itself to ways in which many institutions can collaborate and share resources and share expenses as we try to become more competitive. And of course, nothing happens without strong capital and access to resources. And the financial strength and scale of the credit union movement, of course, becomes the catalyst for so much of what we talked about today. But I would argue that credit unions that can organize themselves around this operating model will see financial strength as an outcome of doing these things. So with that, Greg, it's been a great pleasure to have the chance to talk to the group this morning. I will hand back to you, sir, and see if we have any questions that have come in.
Yeah, I first want to say, Mark, that was a really enlightening presentation, and I know we've already gotten a couple comments from attendees saying the exact same thing, just on the way you laid that out. I know Brian was also watching, and I think he probably has some questions and comments too in relation to what you presented. We do have a few questions so far from attendees, but Brian, I wondered first if you had thoughts or questions for Mark.
Well, just another question, Mark, and then we'd sure want to hear from our listeners. You talked about the importance of the success of fintechs in looking at what to us are very often a series of bundled activities and transactions and businesses, and they take a strand and they reduce friction and build successful business models on that. So as we're looking at this as financial institutions, and we're looking for ways that we can reduce friction. And you talked about the importance of responding to consumers' demand for digital first experience. So if we take those two initial comments and then your subsequent comment that really it's not just digital capacity, it's digital leadership and the importance of that leadership. And you gave us a roadmap for the future, but could you say a little bit more about how you would characterize that digital leadership and how we develop that digital leadership among ourselves and in our institutions?
Right. Well, first of all, Brian, thank you for being so attentive. I think you've just provided a great summary of everything I said. Maybe you should do the presentation next time. That was outstanding. So Brian, for me, it really all comes down to the awareness, education, and willingness to embrace technology. So let me explain. We cannot ignore the technological trends that we're seeing today in our industry. Ignoring them would be fatal, literally, for our credit union system. And it's very important to embrace these changes and become more aware of them, to educate our teams about them, to educate our volunteer boards about them. Remember, many of our volunteer boards come from outside the industry and they don't sit within it as we do. So the awareness and education piece is fundamental. And then, of course, execution. And around the execution of it, the willingness to partner and collaborate, yes, even with some of these fintechs, Brian, that, as you said, are taking a sliver of our market in many cases and becoming excellent in delivering that product or service because they can focus singularly, not on the many myriad things that we have to focus on. And I would applaud, I'm privileged to work with a lot of credit unions who have the right mindset, Brian, their willingness to embrace the change that's coming and to actually think about their execution path. So that would be my response.
We do, as I mentioned, have a couple of questions already out there from some of our attendees. So I'm going to get to some of those for both of you. And Mark, let's start with you. And maybe Brian, you have some thoughts on this too. But this is someone somewhat anonymous, but they asked, how do you get credit unions to think holistically and not competitively to be able to participate in shared services? And, it's interesting because we see in a lot of countries that that's not an issue. But I know here in the US, for instance, that would probably be a big issue for a lot of credit unions.
Yes, well, great question, Greg. And I hope anonymous has nothing to do with the hacking the cyber threat anonymous that I just read about recently. That was a scary situation. Anyway, here's the thing. We have to create a call to action. In the United States model, it's relatively easy to get credit unions to think more holistically when the top 4 banks in this country spending over $10 billion individually, Greg, on technology annually. $10 billion individually, singularly on technology. In other markets, we've got similar, although perhaps not quite as extreme examples as that. The call to action has to be, how can we maintain our place in the marketplace and continue to be relevant to our members? And we cannot compete with those kinds of budgets, Greg. We just can't. And so the ability for us to pool our resources in our cooperative culture is one of the strong suits that credit unions have to play in this game. And I would encourage, and I always do encourage credit unions everywhere to look for those sources of collaboration. I used to say when I was at MasterCard, Greg, and I'll end with my response with this, you don't compete around card security. Card security is an industry issue. Everyone has to play their part because having poor security is bad for the system. We can't just choose to have a blinkered view of our technology strategies at credit unions. We have to think collaboratively because that's in the best interest of the system.
Absolutely.
Very good.
And Greg, I would add that, we've worked with credit unions in a number of countries where they see the importance of it, but there's always a free rider temptation to be that outlier that says, well, I want mine to be blue or I want mine to be red. And yet what it often boils down to is the business case for it. And can you show the efficiencies, the cost savings you're going to have by collaboration that impacts the financial performance of the institution? And can you show the additional revenue that you can get? I mean, absolutely. This is about better service to the members, but they also look at what's the business case for this at the ground level. And especially in a context where we have increasing regulations and there's increasing regulatory costs for a number of different issues. And this is a way to help generate the savings of costs and the revenue to meet that regulatory compliance cost.
Very good. Another question from Trisha. She asks, hello, Mark. First of all, she says, hello, Mark. Brilliant presentation today. In 2019, we worked with the Institute of the Future to create 2030 scenarios for the CU industry here in the US. Due to COVID-19, these scenarios will certainly accelerate and or change dramatically. Do you have additional insights or data related to the financial services industry in 2030? Thank you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Tricia. Good to see and hear from you. I do. Not only would I refer back to those 5 macro trends that I mentioned, Tricia, right at the beginning, driving scale, the advance of technology, consumer expectations changing, competition changing, and demographic shifts. Not only would I refer to those, but I would also come back to this notion that 10 years from now, we have to have an emphasis on how much we can allow members to serve themselves. I can't emphasize enough how fast our world is changing. And the ability for us to adapt our business model, I hate to use these sort of corporate speak terms, Tricia, but to adapt our business model to that world where we take our in-person relationships that we're renowned for and we digitize them is going to be fundamental to our future success.
All right. Another question here from Zachary. He writes, Dear Mark, will this digital transformation not alienate the poorer countries who are very dependent on microcredit? I am scared of polarization.
Yeah, that's a great question. We see so many different examples of this polarization, not just around financial services. Unfortunately, article yesterday about the vaccine for COVID-19 and how the polarization regrettably might even play out in that scenario. So Zachary, yes, I would agree with you. However, I would add this. We've seen in many different markets the ability to use technology to leapfrog the path that many other countries or financial institutions have followed. I'm a great admirer of Brian Branch, and I've seen Brian's work in many emerging economies. And he's always educated me on how certain mobile payment systems, for example, have evolved in certain markets, leapfrogging traditional payment systems. And I'm encouraged by that, Zachary. It is my hope that technology is a way for those countries not only to keep pace, with the changing world, but to leapfrog paths that they would have had to follow otherwise. So I guess I'm an optimist, Zachary, about that.
Brian, did you want to say anything in regards to that? Because certainly we have seen that at World Council, where we've seen that it's sometimes easier to implement a lot of these digital services because there wasn't anything there that you're replacing necessarily.
Yeah, actually, we have had lots of successful experiences working with credit unions who have found that they can go to remote rural areas where there isn't enough population density to support a branch office, or to reach low-income populations who have limited mobility with mobile services. And very often, if you can get a telephone signal, if you can get a connectivity, it's very empowering because people have phones. They find even illiterate populations are not innumerate, and people learn how to use phones and become very adept at it. People with very limited income or wealth, one of their prized possessions, most active possessions will be their cell phone. And there's a lot of good that credit unions can do by providing these people with access to financial services through their mobile devices. And so it's been a very empowering journey of digitization with credit unions especially in Africa and Latin America and Asia.
Another question, this one from Mark, from Michael. He asks, could blockchain technology enable credit unions to develop worldwide member identification and provide an element of differentiation?
Great question. I've actually been privileged to be involved in the evolution of blockchain. I serve as an advisory board member for CU Ledger, which is a US-based credit union service organization. And CU Ledger is actually one of the earlier players in blockchain member identity verification. I think the short answer is that blockchain as a technology is incredibly valuable to us long term. However, I don't see a near-term play for blockchain in the daily lives of consumers. I think blockchain is still evolving as a concept. However, as digital trust becomes even more important in this world of ours, we do have opportunities to use technology like blockchain to quickly identify a member within our ecosystem and avoid them from having to go through perhaps more time-consuming, laborious ways to authenticate themselves. I'm sure Brian won't object to this because CU Ledger is a wonderful service organization, but their evolution of their member ID program is actually taking off here in the United States with certain large credit unions. And I think that's the model that we will see the first applications of this technology.
Yeah, and actually CU Ledger, certainly an associate member of the World Council, and has written quite a bit about that digital member identity on our Challenge 2025 page. So it's a great correlation or connection that you make there. We've got time for one more question, and then we're going to have to wrap up. So I want to get to this. Hector asks how to face the competition of fintechs because they don't have the regulation in several companies the same way that cooperatives do.
I know. This is one of the most frustrating aspects, I think, Greg, of fintechs, and Hector makes a great point. The regulatory changes we've seen in certain markets around the world have enabled fintechs to become more prominent. Brian really hit the nail on the head a few minutes ago when he said that, they focus on a sliver of our industry. The trouble is they take many slivers collectively, because there are thousands of fintechs and they're all kind of trying to eat away at us. We have to come back to basics, Greg, in order to remain competitive. Focus on the credit union value proposition, why credit unions are different from fintechs. Our focus on the well-being of consumers' lives and financial health. The fact that we can deliver technology that's comparative, at least, with what the fintechs are offering. Perhaps not identical, but comparative. And sometimes, Greg, I hate to say it, but good enough really can be good enough when we're trying to compete, if we have that additional value proposition that credit unions bring. And the final comment, but before, I'm sure Brian will have a reaction, is look for opportunities to collaborate with fintechs. I have a number of clients here in the US who are on their third or fourth fintech collaboration, Greg. And Hector, it's very interesting for me how we can sometimes turn the table from thinking about fintechs as competitors to thinking about some of them, not all of them, of course, but some of them as collaborators.
I would agree with Mark's comments. It's a due diligence process. It's a member service business analysis case. There are some fintechs which can be strategic partners with us, and there are other fintechs that won't do our members well. And so it's a matter of making that analysis and finding our strategic partners.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's going to bring us to the top of the hour. I want to thank, I know Brian does too, I'm sure. Thank you so much, Mark, for your comments and your presentation. I have no doubt that it's going to get a lot of reviews and new views once we have it up. And again, we'll have that on our YouTube channel later today, youtube.com/woku/WOCCU. And Mark, thanks so much. Thanks so much for being here.
You're very welcome, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Right.
Thanks, Greg.
And that's going to conclude our webinar on driving the digital transformation in the COVID-19 era. Again, you can visit our YouTube page later today to see this webinar and share it with your friends or your colleagues. And we will see you for our next COVID-19 webinar coming up in the next couple of weeks.